Center for African Studies.
The Africa Policy Journal.
Welcome to this program. My name is Brice, and on behalf of my colleagues Marvellous and Daniel from the Africa Policy Journal at Harvard University, I am delighted to welcome you to this conversation with a very special guest. Kamaru Usman is here. He is the reigning welterweight world champion of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, otherwise known as UFC. Kamaru was born in Nigeria and immigrated at 11 with his parents to the great state of Texas. After a prolific stint as a wrestling student athlete, Kamaru made a successful transition to UFC fighting, where he holds an astonishing record of 17 wins and only 1 loss. Kamaru is not just a man committed to excellence in his craft, he is also a devoted father and a proud Nigerian-American. I am delighted to have on our program the man known in the UFC world as the Nigerian Nightmare. How are you and how is your family handling the COVID-19 situation?
I am well. Thank you for that introduction. We're good. It's a crazy time in the world right now, and we are doing the best that we can to be able to cope and deal with this situation that we're undergoing right now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Kamaru, for joining us. My name is Marvellous. It's an honor to have you here with us. And like Brice said, I'm also Nigerian and also from Austin, Texas. So we share that connection.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Born in Austin or born in Nigeria?
Born in Nigeria, immigrated to Austin.
How old?
When I was 10.
10. So you don't understand broken.
Of course now. I sabi well.
You have no idea what that does to my heart when I'm able to just speak my native language and speak my native tongue. And that's one of the blessings that I've experienced in the last couple of years traveling all around the world is, you'll be surprised, Nigerians are everywhere.
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 Like we're all over
yeah,
the
so
globe.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Likewise. So kind of like going off of what you were talking about, being Nigerian and American, can you talk to us a little bit about your family and background and how your experiences being both Nigerian and American have shaped who you are?
Yes, my family is, I would say typical Nigerian family, of course. Mine, that's the crazy thing about being a human being is you have your own experiences in life. And in my family, my experience is a little special because, my father was a major in the Army and his father, was, one of the higher ups in the police force back in the day. And so my dad was kind of that military man who immigrated here, went to school, became a pharmacist, brought all of us here, went through the process, the proper channels, and bringing us all here. And with that being said, I grew up in a typical Nigerian household. Got your mom and your dad, got my brothers and my sisters, and of course, growing up, we know what you're supposed to do. You have to medical school. Now you go. You have to go to medical school, or you got to be a nurse. A nurse is fallback. You can do that. You got to be a nurse or a pharmacist or an engineer of some sort, and these were or a lawyer or certain things like that. So these were the parts of the career paths that you kind of had to take. And as growing up, I never really understood that until now. When you become an adult, you understand why. Based on even with the current climate right now that's going on in Nigeria, you understand why your families want you to, when you do make it out of there, want you to go into certain career paths, because these are the career paths that are needed anywhere in the world, that you are always going to be able to have a job to sustain a lifestyle for yourself, your family. And so, yeah, typical Nigerian household, grew up that way. Obviously growing up in Texas, you have a little added fuel to be a sportsman as well. So my father didn't mind that as long as we face our studies, so he didn't mind that. And so we were able to kind of do both and juggle both. And my brother, my oldest brother, Cash, who was just recently engaged, he is a doctor in pharmacy. And so he followed suit. He was the oldest, so he went that route. I thought about it. I did a couple of years pre-professional biology until I decided I didn't want to be in school that long to be a doctor, and, you know, went with my path. But the one thing that I always loved about my family is, even as strict as they were, my mother and father were able to give me the freedom for me to still make that choice and that decision. And so that's, I think, ultimately what has led me to be who I am today. And, you know, a big part of it is shaping who I am culturally, because, and I'm so blessed that I am that way, because I was able to grasp the Nigerian aspect of it, of the culture, understanding what it is to be a family, how it is to stick to your family and be with your family. Because there's a huge difference here in America, the cultural wise, a huge difference. You turn 18, get out of my house. It's time for you to go make your own way, as opposed to where it's not uncommon for 3 generations to be in the same household, you know, where I come from. So understanding that aspect of culture and the importance of family, and also getting the American side by them giving me the leeway to be able to go out and find my own and really search for that. So I think these are some of the biggest things that have shaped who I am as a person, as a human being, and I'm extremely thankful for that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like, I'm like inspired and thinking of similar things in my, you know, background as well. So thank you. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Hey, champ. I'm Daniel Oyolu, also Nigerian. I grew up in Houston. Definitely a pleasure to talk to you today. And I wanted to hone in on just one of the last points around that conversation with your parents. Like, meaning, listen, we're Nigerian. So you're painting the picture very, very rosy. You went and told your parents you want to be a professional fighter. What exactly was that conversation like? And was it a one and done type of thing, or was this a process?
Well, you born in Nigeria as well?
I was actually born in Toronto.
Toronto. Okay. You understand Broken?
Well, I did talk well.
Make me just do this interview for Broken.
The APJ.
Yeah. No. It's also a pleasure to meet you, Daniel. Yeah, to answer your question, no, it wasn't. There was a certain, you know, it was a kind of, I would say, I kind of brought them along, pulled them along all throughout my years in my career, to where this all started with wrestling in high school. They didn't really understand. They didn't know that I was wrestling. They didn't understand for the first couple of years. Like I mentioned earlier to Marvellous, I said that I wanted to do sports, and they were okay with that. In Texas, the sports are football, basketball, track and field, and baseball. And I was too short to do basketball. And plus, I just didn't, you know, I didn't have the skills at that point. I did football until I got into high school. Then I realized these guys look like NFL-sized players, and I was still 5'2", 103 pounds. It's just not working out. And my oldest brother played soccer, but it just wasn't that big of a sport, and it still isn't in the States. And so I had to kind of navigate and find where I fit in. And one of the coaches kind of kept asking me, hey, why don't you come try wrestling? And I never really heard of wrestling. I'm thinking WWE, getting thrown off the top turnbuckle, hit with a chair. So there was no way I was going to bring that to my parents and say, hey, I'm getting hit with chairs now. Like, can we do that? No. So my dad knew I was playing football. He was okay with that because that's what everyone did in Texas. You had to play football. And so I just basically, once I made the switch after that freshman year, I decided I'm going to practice. Dad, I'm going to practice. All right. Okay. My son. Okay. Figo. So that was that. So the next 2 years, they just knew I was going to practice. They didn't know where I was going to practice. Because my parents never really came. My dad was working. Never really came to practice or anything like that. But I was wrestling. And it wasn't until my mother saw me on television wrestling my junior year in the city finals, district finals, that she saw me on television and realized, oh wow, that's my son. Then I came home. Then we had to have the conversation. I've been wrestling the whole time, and so they were okay with that at that point, as long as you face your studies. So continued to where now it was time to go to college. And now college were actually looking at me to come out and compete for them. So of course your parents are going to be with whatever is going to pay for school, so they don't have to pay for school. Absolutely. So wrestling became that option to pay for school. So then I went over there to wrestle. I was in college wrestling and I started to climb. Now I started to excel. Now I wasn't just on TV at one point. Now I'm nationally recognized and excelling. So, of course, growing up in an African household, that warms the parents' hearts a little bit to give you a little bit more slack to continue to do this. And so that was a process. And then they saw that, whoa, my son's actually kind of good at this. Now they gave me a little more slack to where now becoming a national champion. And now I'm like, okay, you know what? I want to go chase the Olympic dream. I want to be Olympic champion. So they're like, okay, as long as you finish your studies. But I'm continuing that. So they're letting me continue to build my athletic career. And I'm building. But at this point, the dream of being a doctor, I've already let that go. You know, the dreams of going to school and longer, I've kind of put that, I wouldn't say let it go, but I put it on the back burner. Now it was my athletic aspirations that were going to be in the forefront. And so I just kind of continued with that. And then once I saw that, now my eyes were set on becoming a professional mixed martial artist. It was a little challenging because now I had to come home, and I remember the conversation. I had to come sit with my dad first and talk to him about it. But actually, no, I talked to my mom first, because the mothers are more softer, so you can talk to them. So I talked to my mom a little more first and let her know. And of course, she's like, no, my son, you want to be fighting on on television? And she, of course, they're scared. They're, because they don't really understand it. So I'm scared too, but I'm willing to embark on that journey. And so, like I mentioned to Marvellous, the one thing that I loved about my parents is that they were able to allow me the freedom for me to go out and seek my own ventures, and without disturbance or really, getting involved and trying to pull me away from it. They were wonderful and just kind of supporting and encouraging, because they trusted me that I would make the best decision for myself and the family as a whole. And so that's when I eventually had the conversation with my father. I sat down with him and I told him, hey, my Olympic aspirations are starting to dwindle a bit, that I've kind of set my sights on something new, something different, something more refreshing for me. It's a little more dangerous, but this is what I think I want to do. And of course, I've already rolled out the scroll of how to let them know how it's safer than certain other sports. So I had to kind of convince them with that. And, but my father was good about, okay, if that's the decision. And plus at this point, I'm a 25-year-old young man, to where my father, that's another thing that I respected about him, is he was able to give me that respect to actually go out and chase my dreams.
I definitely appreciate that. And I want to talk a bit about that transition you made between wrestling and mixed martial arts, and, sort of the process and how you thought about that, and then how you trained. But before I do that, actually, growing up in Houston, growing up in Texas, you're so right about Texas sports. Wanted to shout out my colleague here, Marvellous, because she was actually a Texas track star. And an Olympian, represented Team Nigeria in 2016 Olympic finalist. So that's what she meant. Like, oh, it resonates, but she's very modest. That's what resonating means.
Marvellous, you not tell me.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you,
Olympian. You know what? I need to, and that's me too. I think it's because when you're not in your sports gear and ready to go, I don't really, because track and field is actually my ultimate favorite sport to watch. I don't, whenever the Olympics are on, I'm waiting for that day that it's track and field, those few days that it's track and field. So, you know, hats off to you, my sister.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
My pleasure. But to answer your was it Daniel? Daniel, you had a question. What was the question again?
It was just around that process, the transition, wrestling to MMA.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Initially, what I wanted to do is once I left college, that my senior year, 2010, I was a national champion, and I went to the Olympic qualifier, the trials, and did well, but didn't place. But it was enough for the Olympic resident coaches to see me and say, "Wow, okay, this kid could be something." So then they offered that extension to me. So I was a resident athlete at the Olympic Training Center, training for the 2012 Olympics. And so moving out there and training, I was learning, but I just kind of kept sustaining and injuring myself to where, and then now in that process, I've been invited over by a couple of different fighters, big name fighters, to come out and help them train for upcoming competition. So I'm watching all these guys go out and train. I'm helping them, and I'm holding my own. Of course, this is training. It's different. It's not the actual fight, but I'm handling some of these guys very well. And I know nothing of that sport. I'm just doing what I do, and it's working. And then watch these guys go out and compete, and these guys are, you know, on any given night, $300,000, you know, $100,000, you know, making money. And I go out back to my wrestling and go out to fly to a tournament in India that I've trained countless hours for. And when you do place in the tournament, you get a $3,000 check, $2,500. So being an African with African parents, at the end of the day, your parents are going to ask you, how is this job paying your bills? You know? So I started thinking, like, I understand I want to compete. I love the sport of wrestling. It's always going to be my love. But at some point, this has got to provide for myself, provide for me, and give back to my family and pay it forward because they've sacrificed so much for me. And so now mixed martial arts started to look better and better and better. So I'm like, okay, I think I'm starting to have a little more interest in this sport. But at that time, I was dating a boxer. She was an Olympic boxer, my girlfriend at the time. And so I love the sport of boxing as well. And it seemed newer, you know, more just a sport that I really wanted to get into. As a man, you always want to learn how to box. You always want to learn how to do that. So I said, you know what? I want to go box. But seeing how long it took me to even get to the point where I was as a wrestler, I'm thinking, in order to be a boxer, be an Olympic champion boxer, some guys have been doing this all their lives. And I'm trying to dedicate just 4 years, another Olympic cycle, to try to make the Olympic team and become a boxer. And that would completely negate the skill that I just worked 12 years or more to perfect as a wrestler. And I just had to put it in place. What would allow me to still use those skills, as well as learning boxing, something that I had grown to love now because I had a girlfriend who was doing that. And, you know, it was just a perfect storm. Mixed martial arts was there. I could still use my wrestling. And with that, just be more dynamic with it and then learn the boxing aspect of something else. And so it was just a no-brainer. This was a sport for me. This sport and it was picking up traction. And then at that time, I had met some really, really major figures and major players in the sport to where I decided, you know what, it makes sense. This is time for me to go out and get into this sport.
Kamaru, so to our understanding, you are the first African-born UFC champion. That is quite a unique distinction, quite amazing. I'm curious to know if there have been specific challenges you faced as an African trailblazer in your field that other people from different backgrounds wouldn't have experienced in your climb to the top.
Yeah, yeah. There's always going to be challenges that you face. As far as you're received, as far as how much love you are able to receive from the people, because let's be honest, we live in a world to where people just aren't willing to like you or even want to understand you or listen to you just by the color of your skin. So living in that world, and then of course being from an African background as well. I don't know what it is, but coming from the most powerful continent in the world, it's just something about that. And I with all of the people, the influential people that I've met, that I've talked to in my life, it's just something about coming from the most powerful continent in the world that just evokes fear from other people. And so when people get that sense of fear, in order for them to cope and lash out is by them wanting to oppress or not want to understand you in any way, shape, form, or fashion. So yes, of course, there's been a lot of different changes, but the one thing that helps me sleep at night is the quote that I live by. And with great power comes great responsibility. And I was not the guy who, I didn't grow up thinking, you know what, I'm going to be the first of this, the first of that. God gives you these gifts. God puts you in certain places at certain times for you to inspire, motivate certain people. When I was growing up in Nigeria, there was no way in hell you could tell me that you will grow up, live in America, and become the UFC, the first African-born champion of the world. And it's, how rare is it to be the first of anything nowadays? So to be that first one to go out there and set the tone that, hey, this could happen. You don't have to, just because you're in this situation now in Nigeria to where you're farming and you don't know how you're going to eat next week, or there's no light. There is light at the end of the tunnel. So being that figure and being put in that situation, it's amazing, and it's monumental, and something that I definitely do not take lightly.
No, thank you for that. I'm struck by the fact that even though I asked about the challenges you experienced, you spend significantly more time talking about the awesome opportunities that you've experienced and how you managed to make the most of those challenges. And I think that kind of positivity is something that is a distinctive feature of the African youth, and one of the reasons why I have so much faith in African people making something of themselves despite everything they face. So thank you for that very positive response. I want to ask you about something a little bit more personal. So a month before so basically your father, as far as I understand, was recently released from prison. And I was just curious to know, how it has been for you and your family to be reunited with him, and how have you guys spent the past couple of months? It must have been a very emotional journey.
Yeah, it's been amazing being reunited. One of the things is that my father wasn't sent off to a different country or a different place to where we never saw him. Mm-hmm. He was put in a place to where basically he couldn't come home. And that was difficult in the beginning, especially for my mother and my whole family in a whole. It was very, very difficult. But we still had the responsibility of being that foundation, that ground, that figure that held him together in there. Because I can't even imagine what it would be mentally for a man like my father, someone who was an entrepreneur, a mover and a shaker, someone who makes things happen, to be told you have to sit still and you have to sit here for a long time. So I couldn't even imagine how tough that decision was, that challenge was for him. But the biggest thing for me is, and being a Nigerian born in Nigeria, one of the greatest things for us is honoring your family, carrying your family name to a certain place. When my father was in Texas, when we were there before his situation happened, I saw how my father moves, and I saw how he carries himself. I saw how other people treated my father. I saw how other people saw my father. And we carried that on our shoulders as men, as boys of someone like my father. We carried that responsibility on our shoulder to make him proud, to uphold the Usman name and make sure that when my father is back home, his name is higher than the place where he left it before he left. And that, I think, in the back of my mind was always my mission, because it was difficult having my father go away and, you know, feeling like, yes, of course he's there. He's still able to yell at you on the phone if he needs to yell at you. He's still able to kind of conduct it and guide his family the way that he needs to guide his family. But I was a young man. I could have made any decision that I wanted to make. But I think he had, before that situation happens, he has instilled the values in us that was strong enough to carry us to the next level, to where we always wanted to uphold that. And that was always my mission. And nowadays it's crazy, and it's humbling for me to see how my father smiles when I'm around him, and my mother and our aunts and our uncles, and see how they talk about me when I'm around them. So it's almost surreal, and it doesn't feel real, to the point where kind of I always like, I don't know how to handle it sometimes, because my parents are celebrities now, you know, and so in the African community, in the Nigerian community, my parents are celebrities, and so learning how to deal with that and handle that, it's you know, when I think about it, I remember growing up, and I remember in college reading a book called The Pursuit of Happiness, and by Plato, and I would say this is what that is for me, is having my heart being full by seeing how my parents receive where I am and how I've helped uphold their name. That's the biggest joy to me right now.
And thank you for sharing that, Kamaru. I want to take you back now to 2010, which is just basically a month before your father went on trial. You won an NCAA Division II national championship in wrestling. I can only begin to imagine what must have been going through your mind at that point. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what was your mindset going into that competition, knowing everything that was going on within your family, and how that has carried you forward as you transition to UFC fighting and beyond.
Yes, it's actually tough. It's a little tough to explain, because I'm kind of one of those, if I could classify my mind, how my mind works, I'm a problem solver in simplest term. It's like an algebra equation. Mm-hmm. You know, there's an answer, there's the problem, there's the formula. Learn how to apply it, and you can get that answer. And I think that's kind of how my brain works, to where I had a goal, what I wanted to do. Of course, athletically, this is where I was at. And then this situation happens with my family, and it hurt me. It hurt me mentally. It really hurt me. But at the same time, I had to really sit back and understand that if I don't continue with this journey that I'm on, then I'm just letting everyone down. And I think that was one of the biggest things that myself and my oldest brother, Cash, that's one thing that we understood, is that we can't help the situation. We can't help the family if we don't continue. And that's a tough decision to make when you're in the situation. It's extremely tough. Why don't I quit school and just say, you know what, I'm gonna quit school, go get a regular job, and try to just help provide and pay a little bit of the bills, as opposed to continuing to stay in school, get out. And now do you just pay bills, you pay the mortgage, you are able to actually financially contribute. And so that was a tough, very, very tough thing for me to decide. But, you know, and that's a big thing as well, that to where I attest to my upbringing, and my father and my mother and my fathers, because they were very diligent in letting us know that your life doesn't just stop because of what's going on with us. We have to continue. That's the way that you actually can help. And with their guidance, it was, it was a no-brainer. I had to continue to do it. And plus, I set out a goal for myself. And just give you a little background of kind of how my mind works is ever since I was competing, like I didn't even tell my parents that I was competing the first 3 years. I didn't even tell them that I was wrestling. They had to see it on television. So we had teammates who their parents came each and every day and watched them train, wrestle, compete. But I didn't need that. So I was used to that, my parents not being there, not coming. But psychologically, that was a win for me because if I could make them proud without them being there, that's even better. As opposed to if they come and see me, yes, of course, I would have liked them to be there a little bit more, but it didn't matter if they weren't there. So where I saw some of my teammates, when their parents didn't come, they couldn't perform. They were upset. Oh, my parents aren't here to watch me. And it was kind of hindering them to the point where I was so strong mentally, I was still going to go out there and perform, whether my parents were there or they weren't there. And so it just carried on to even when I was in college, it was even more fire. The fact that you guys are going to take my father from me, it's even more fire. My dad's even, I'm going to make him even more proud. And so, you know, just certain things like that in life that lit a fire under me to where they, you know, where most people would think they would hinder me and would break me, they actually helped uplift me and give me more strength.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, Kamaru, just love all the things that you've been saying. And it seems like your family, specifically your parents, have had a lot of impact on who you are and how much, you know, seriously you take all the things that you do. So I'm wondering, in the same way, I know that you have a 6-year-old daughter. So I'm wondering, what impact do you have on her? How is it raising her as a professional athlete? Like, how are you managing all of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a tough one, you know, because and now you look, when I'm a parent and I'm being a parent, I look at my parents in a different light because all the things they had to kind of go through and deal with 3 rambunctious boys and you know, early on, then having a daughter as well. Now me having my own daughter, there isn't really no playbook into how to raise a child. And so with me, I'm thankful that I've been able to see some of the things that I've been able to see, and I've been able to study in the places that I've been able to study. So it's in college, I went into a major family studies. So I was able to really diverge into that. So learning about the infant development, child and adolescent development, and the aging adult, and just learning how kind of like the psyche of the mind kind of works in certain places, especially in this country. I kind of learned how to merge all of my experiences with what I've been taught as well, because I can't expect my daughter to grow up the way that I did. Because I grew up in Nigeria. Culturally, it was different. It was different. If my daughter had to live in the place where I lived at when I was growing up, I don't know how she would handle it. I don't think she could handle it. And so it's just learning how to put all of that together and be the best possible role model that I can be. Because, and I see her, she's very observant. My daughter's very observant. She watches what I do. And of course she has her own mind. So I'm letting her be, because, you know, obviously growing up as African parent, you know, as Africans, our parents tend to have the control over us to where this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And you are going to follow that. It's not the same here in America. Kids are completely different. And so learning how to collectively put all of those together, learning how to guide her, and as well let her do it, because I'm raising a young Black girl in society nowadays. So I have to be mindful and I have to be sensitive of that, to letting her know her identity and know herself and know who that she is, and also where she comes from and the power that she has.
Thank you for that answer. I'm inspired too. I'm sure she's proud to have you as a dad, and she'll be talking about you in the same way, like many years from now.
Oh, she already does. She tells all her friends.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm just curious, which athletes did you look up to as you were coming up in the game, as you were training? and going through your own journey?
For me, of course, it's especially in that combat world, it's extremely tough not to look up to somebody like Muhammad Ali. And growing up, these are the figures that I loved. Muhammad Ali, not just necessarily of how he was as a competitor, but also actually mostly for what he was able to do and what he stood for outside of the ring, because of the society that we live in. You know, some of those problems and some of those things that he stood for and fought for are still prevalent today. And also Mike Tyson, as an athlete, the ferocity that Mike Tyson brought in as a competitor, it was something to be admired. And also, you know, I mean, now it's different now, because now I actually have a relationship with Mike Tyson. So now I'm able to actually talk to him and find out what those stem from, and pick his brain a little bit and understand what was in his psyche. And so that's fun. And for me, you know, switching gears into wrestling and in that world, just looking up to some of the best wrestlers that have ever come out of American history, and seeing that we've had African and American wrestlers. And I love, there's a lot of different wrestlers. You know, like I love, there's a wrestler called Dave Schultz, who's one of the best American wrestlers, Caucasian guy. But I loved his style. I loved what he stood for as well. But for me, I always kind of seek out the people that I can, you know, that I can relate to. And those are guys like Kevin Jackson, you know, multiple time Olympic and world champion, Kenny Monday. And these are the black wrestlers that I've seen come before me. And that's the thing. That's kind of how I'm living, is understanding that these are guys that came before me. These are African-American wrestlers that paved the way. So by the time I started to pick up traction, these are the guys that I was looking at. And so I understand my responsibility, that I am someone that kids are going to look at when they start embarking on this journey. This is someone they're going to look at and say, oh, I want to be like him, or I want to do it the way he did. And so I understand it, but those are the guys: Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, and of course, when it came to wrestling, Kevin Jackson and Kenny Monday.
And so thinking about that, you know, that lineage, that transition, and now it's, you know, if folks are looking up to Kamaru Usman, what advice do you give to young fighters who are thinking about whether or not they want to fight, how to go about it, and even particularly young African fighters?
It's tough to answer that question, because, you know, there's different circumstances. There's a lot of different moving parts that play a role in what we do. And so it's very tough, because you never know what circumstances someone is dealing with, and what their capabilities someone is dealing with, and what handicaps some people are dealing with. You never know that. So it's very tough to answer that. But if I could put it in simplest terms, as an athlete, something that my mother used to always say when we was a kid, and I just kind of look at her and roll my eyes, and, you know, and she would always say, Rome wasn't built in a day. Rome was not built in one day. Rome was not built in one day. And I never really understood that until I got to the point where I was at. Now, when I look back on my journey, I'm like, man, there were times where I'm starting out, and I would always think, I remember when I was 1-0 as a professional. And then I lost my second professional fight, and I was 1-1. And I was around guys. I was on teams with guys that were 30-5, or 30-1, or 28-0. And I'm like, wow, how did they get to 28? Like, how did they win that many competitions? I'm 1-1, and I'm already thinking about, man, this is too hard. And then gradually but slowly, I remember I was 5-1. Then all of a sudden I was 10-1. All of a sudden I was 13-1. And now I'm in the place where I'm at. Now I look back, I'm like, wow, I really have that many fights. And it all goes back to what my mom used to say: Rome was not built in a day. It all takes work. You have to continue to work. And you have to understand while you are working that it's not going to happen overnight, that it's going to take time. And with the effort and with the applied work, it's you're going to get there.
That's so real.
That is so real. And I think it's also applicable to the next question that I'm about to ask you. Recently, you've seen Nigerian youths peacefully protesting like the disbandment of SARS, and you've been very, very vocal using your platform to bring attention to that. So I'm wondering, what do you think Nigeria needs for change? And when you think about Rome not being built in one day, like what can the youth continue to do? What does Nigeria need?
Well, it's already started, and this is something that excuse me, I'm extremely passionate about, because at one point I was growing up in that system, and my parents grew up in that system to where they saw it slowly happen. This is something that has happened for decades and decades and decades, and when something is that deep, that it affects that many people, and it's it's been such a culture. How do you break that? And it's easier said than done. It's easy to say, okay, this is how you break that when you're dealing with 100 people. But when you're dealing with 200 plus million people that have families, that have kids, whose kids' kids, who have grandparents and great-grandparents, like that are there, how do you break that mold to where it affects change? Because that, when I see it, that's what I want to see. I want to see the great grandmother that's there in that house with the grandmother, with the mother and the kids, the ones that are in that house. I want to see them affected immediately with the change. I want to see them living better. I want to see them having a better way of life. But that's the thing, is I'm understanding that it's extremely tough to be able to do that, but we have to start somewhere. And that's what I'm extremely proud and happy that the youths nowadays this is where we start. You have to start somewhere, and this is how you start it, to where eventually those youths are going to be great grandparents, hopefully, to where now they're going to say, you know what, we started this, and look where we are now. Our kids are lawyers. Our kids are architects. Our kids are doctors in our great country. And look how much our country has flourished. And so that's one thing that I'm extremely passionate about. It's still uneasy for me to wrap my mind around not being able to affect the change right away to where those generations can all see it. But like my mom says, Rome wasn't built in a day. And so we have to start somewhere.
No, that's totally real. And I love what you said about how they're setting the stage. And, Nigeria's population, I think, is more than 60% of the population is under 26. So,
Absolutely.
Definitely change is going to come as the generations get older. And we're seeing that they are not just going to stand by and let the government just government. So that's good. Following up with this question, you are a Nigerian-American. What actions do you hope that the US would take to sort of pressure the Nigerian government towards like necessary change?
This one is a very tough one for me, because let's be honest. Nigeria is one of the richest nations in the world if they're able to really use their resources and reap the benefits of their resources. We are one of the richest nations in the world. But it's tough to say, okay, these countries need to come in and interfere, when some of those countries are the same countries that have continued to rob us from those resources for years and years and years. So it's extremely difficult for me to wrap my mind around, because this is our issue. For lack of a better word, we need to get our shit together. Why can our leaders not say, you know what, let's get this together. It's time to allow some of this to trickle down, and so our people can flourish. It's just something that which is very tough for me to grasp because I grew up in a family-oriented structure to where we wanted to share. We all ate together. Growing up, 3 boys, my mom would make a big plate of rice and stew. We all eat in the same plate, in the same tray. And that's just, for me, that's the Nigerian way. That was the African way. I don't know at what point we went wrong to where certain people felt like we need to be greedy and we need to hog all of these resources and all of this financial things, as opposed to letting it trickle down to the whole economy, which would make the country thrive, which would make us a giant in the world. But I don't know where we went wrong in that aspect, but calling for other countries to now interfere when those are some of the same countries that have robbed us for years, is how do they not interfere and continue to rob us? How do they not, how do they not come in and say, all right, we're going to help you guys, but on the back end, they're continue to steal from us to be more and more. And so I think there needs to be some type of pressure to where, hey, you guys are making the rest of the world look bad. You guys need to get it together. But I think there kind of needs to be a different approach as far as the interference, because once we start allowing, we've seen this from generations to generations. Once we start letting some of the other countries come in and interfere, that's where you get the mass genocide. That's where you get the civil war. I mean, that's where you get we saw it in South Africa. I mean, we saw it in certain places, even in Congo. And like, once they start interfering, things start to change. And if I had my way, I don't understand how every country in Africa doesn't just call a meeting and sit down and say, how do we better this whole side of the globe? How do we take care of us? So, yeah, hopefully I get to the position, I get in a place to where I am able to affect change in that sense at one point.
I love that answer. And I'm totally with you. I'm like team colonialism is the reason why we're all here in this situation that Africa finds itself in. So definitely agree with everything. And I think you've also touched on the question that I'm about to ask, which is, what role do you think that African sports figures, especially the ones who are from the Nigerias, the Kenyas, the South Africas, what role can those sports figures play in driving change within their own countries?
We play a big role because, as I mentioned, with great power comes great responsibility. When we're the people that everyone's looking at when it's time to compete, to be entertained, we have a lot of power in that sense, to where we can raise certain awarenesses to people. Can be like, oh, I didn't even know that was going on there. Okay, now I have to look into it. And I think we've done it's tough to say, oh, we did a great job, something that's still going on in our country. But I think we've kind of broke ground. We've scratched the surface as far as raising awareness all over the world as far as what's going on. But we play a monumental, we have a monumental impact on what's going on, because we are who the kids and the youths and even the families are looking at to entertain and to inspire. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. It doesn't matter how poor we are, how much we don't have to eat. But when that World Cup is on and Nigeria is about to play, and our athletes are about, or the Olympics are on and Nigeria is about to run and then they're about to take center stage, we have to watch, and that's the one thing, that's how I grew up. When we win, we all win. And knowing that, you know that you always have the support of the people. Of course, people have their own opinions, and that goes without saying. But, having that support of the people and knowing that you can touch them and inspire and impact them in such a way, it's such a blessing, and that's a big responsibility that we carry.
Absolutely, I hear that, and thank you for carrying it well and speaking up when you can.
Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit just about, obviously you've discussed your experiences growing up in Nigeria and how they've inspired you. It's a gift back, just kind of on that statement. And you've discussed in the past about starting a foundation What type of charity work do you do when you're not too busy winning?
Man, we and that was something that's and even I'm still talking to with you know, my our friend Crystal, who's a lawyer in Nigeria that we work with. She works very well with us as far as organizing those things. Is we put together a big package, a big relief for the COVID when the COVID first hit, because of course it was going to rip apart that whole country, because there's a lot of people who rely on what we make today is what we live off of. You know, walking the streets, hawking certain products. And I was a product of that, you know, and having a shop and having small shops to where we pay, you know, sell things and pay our bills. I was a product of that. And so knowing that that is something that's going to affect them, of course, we put together a big package to where we were able to roll out in Abuja, in Benin, and Lagos, in certain states, to where we were able to, you know, give some provisions and things of that nature, you know, to provide some form of relief to some of those families. And we're still working on seeing what we can do to still help out right now. But yes, the foundation is in effect. We're working on it, and alongside with my manager as well. My manager is also he's done a great deal of building wells in certain places. And I lost count. I don't want to misquote, but he's built quite a few wells in certain different cities. And, you know, that's certain things that we're trying to do. We're trying to give back as much as we can give back to, you know, leave that, not just that country, but the world in a better place than when we were in it.
And with that, you know, when you're done fighting, I mean, in fact, when you don't collect all the belt finish.
Not true, my brother, not true.
What legacy do you hope to leave?
I want to leave a legacy of when you really look at what Muhammad Ali did is at this point in time, it's not necessarily about what he did inside the ring. What he did inside the ring was great, but what he did outside as well is what speaks to you as what type of human being that was. And everyone that's associated with him, everyone that's in his family, let's be honest, they have to feel that pressure to be an upstanding human being, someone that stands for something. That's that type of legacy that you want to leave, to where when someone's associated with you, they automatically understand that they have a responsibility to stand for something. And you see it with Muhammad Ali. It's tough to where if you're speaking with Muhammad Ali's daughter, it's tough for you to not think that she stands for something or she represents something. It's tough to talk to his sons and not think that they stand for something or they represent something. That's the type of legacy that I want to leave, is that when you look at my offsprings and you look at everything that I've affiliated and associated with, you're like, okay, I know what that stands for.
That's incredible.
I love that. I love that everything that you do is so wrapped in not just yourself, but also in your generations to come. I think that's so important. And it just shows like how much vision and purpose that you have. So lastly, to end the interview, we want to know, which one would you pick, jollof rice or potted yam soup?
When I was younger, jollof rice, of course, that's the quick, easy, what kids like to eat. But me, I don't. I eat rice in so many different forms now because a lot of my life is wrapped into my diet and eating for performance, rather than just for enjoyment. So when I can get a good potted yam and soup, fufu and soup, and right now I think I do have soup. This is one of the only times that you will catch me with soup and potted yam in the fridge. So I do have some, and I would have to say soup and potted yam. That's when I have time and I want to really enjoy and eat. That's what I would go for.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kamaru, for your time. This has been such a great interview. And thank you so much for coming and joining us. I'm going to let Brice and Daniel thank you as well.
Thank you, Marvellous. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been awesome, champ. You know, can't wait to see all the great things you continue to do.
My brother, I appreciate it. I appreciate you now. If we just talk now, maybe we don't finish interview, maybe we talk.
Yeah, maybe snap picture, small.
We definitely should. No, I just wanted to say thank you again, Kamaru, for taking the time. It's been a really fun and enjoyable conversation. I'm sure our listeners will thoroughly enjoy it as much as I have.
Brice, thank you. I appreciate that.